All right, well, let's do that again. So my name's Christian. I'm the pastor here at City Light. Welcome if it's your first time here. Super excited that you could join us today. I hope I get a chance to meet you, so don't rush out, even though you might be really cold. It's okay. Grab a cup of coffee. I'd love to hang out with you just for a couple seconds and meet you. If you're online and you're here for your first time, you can go to ourcitylight.org/connect, and then we can email and maybe get together sometime. And also, welcome to the online audience. We're so happy that you can join us. I know we have people watching every week. So, okay, if you're new or you haven't been with us for a couple weeks, we're in the middle of a kind of a long series called Show Up Different, where we're talking through what the Bible refers to as the fruit of the Spirit. So we've been talking about this Bible verse for over a month. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience or forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Okay, so we're on kindness today. So we've been talking one fruit per week. And if you have got one of our study guides, we have a study guide that we produced, written by people in our church. If you don't have one, they're on the table on your way out. We encourage you to get one of these. If you're online and you don't have one, you can go to ourcitylight.org/show-up. Show-up, and it'll take you to a form where you can request one, and we'll mail you one. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about kindness, and I want to tell you, so the idea is, do we show up in our lives in kind of a world full of anxiety, a world full of issues, of tension? You know, we're in kind of a cultural moment where there's not a lot of agreement. I don't know if you've noticed that. There's a lot of easy fighting and hard to find common ground, and so in that moment, how do we show up in our workplaces? How do we show up in our families? How do we show up online? Do we show up any differently than people who aren't followers of Jesus? So if you just take the fruit of the Spirit, and it says, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified our flesh with its passions and desires. So crucified our base desires, our worst parts of ourselves, right? And instead, we live by the Spirit. So we're to keep in step with the Spirit. So are we showing up with peace in a moment of anxiety? Are we showing up with kindness? Are we showing up with love? And so that's how we want to be defined, not just by what we believe, but by who we are and how we act in the everyday moments of our lives, right? So today, we're talking about kindness, and I'll tell you, working on each of these teachings as I go along, I'm realizing that each one I'm progressively worse at. And so kindness, actually, I really struggle to even define kindness. Because it's like, it's like one of those things like everybody knows what kindness is, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know what kindness is. But then, if you have to talk about it for more than 3 minutes, which I do, you need to think about it a little bit more. What is kindness? What are some words that you would use to describe kindness? Go ahead, call one out. Respect, that's a good one, I like it. Anybody else? Thoughtful, okay. Try to talk above a whisper, okay. 2 weeks in a row, got you. All right, thoughtful, respect, anything else? Other words that would describe kindness? What was that? Love, caring, empathetic, listening, believing, or forgiving. Sure, that works too. I mean, at this point, I'm just saying whatever you say, so you can really mess with me, right? Donuts. Oh, what? Compassion. Good. I like that, compassion. Okay. Huh? Sweetness. Aw, Debbie. Like honey, right? Yeah. Debbie is a professional honey maker? I don't know. That seems weird. Okay. All right. So good. And you're kind of like, yeah, some of these are closer than others, right? Like believing was nowhere close, but we just went with it. All right, Dave. But like we kind of know what kindness looks like. I didn't hear mercy, which is interesting, because I think mercy would have been an interesting one and maybe the right answer. No, I'm just kidding. But there's like other words that describe pieces of kindness. But what I want to talk about today is what is biblical kindness, okay? So is there a kindness in the world today that's different than the kindness we see in the Bible? And I kind of want to just take like a thought of like nice, like what it means to be nice and what it means to be biblically kind. Because I think we can all be nice. And that's kind of expected. Like niceness is kind of expected. But biblical kindness is a whole other thing. And I want to really dig into that and see that it is really different than like just holding the door open for somebody. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like kindness isn't less than niceness, but it is more than niceness, if that makes sense, okay? So like you definitely should hold the door for people, but if that's what we're thinking where kindness ends, we're not operating in biblical kindness, right? Like kindness is more than just putting on a nice face when you're talking to someone that you disagree with. You know, like there's a lot of stuff in the world right now about like be kind, right? Like you see signs out and people be kind, be kind, be kind, preaching it at you, and all the while you're wondering the person posting that how kind they're being. I mean, I think those things too, so you probably do, right? But like, what do they mean? What do we mean by that in our culture? We kind of mean just like be tolerant, don't we? Like just don't be jerks. Right? Like at the very base level, can we just all agree to not be jerks? That's what we're shooting for. And I would argue that biblical kindness is shooting for something a little bit higher. And one of the best stories that, for me personally, that I love from the Bible was written about 500 or 600 years before Christ. It's the book of Ruth. It's a really short book. It's a beautiful book. It's 4 chapters long. And it tells the story of this woman, Ruth, who wasn't even an Israelite. Okay? She was a Moabite woman who converted to becoming a worshiper of the God of Israel, Yahweh. Okay? So it's a lot of Old Testament stuff. If you're not familiar with the Bible, don't worry. It's a beautiful narrative. It's really easy to jump into. Okay? So I want to read a couple pieces of this story so that you can really grasp the story. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about Ruth. So at the very beginning of the book, it says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So when the judges ruled was not one of the best times of Israel's history, just so you know. So things are rough, and there's a famine. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. So they were moving around trying to find some food. They were trying to find some land that they could farm so that they could live, because there was such a bad famine. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. So the story gets real pretty quickly. That they move. Imagine this. Imagine, you want to think about Naomi. She's a major character in the story. There's 3 major characters, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. We're going to meet all of them, right? But Naomi is this older woman who's got some daughters, and she moves to another country. And this is in a time when women really had no rights. They had no property. They usually weren't even allowed to be educated. And they were often seen as the property of their husband. So her husband dies. So now she's really at the mercy of her son-in-laws. And then both of her son-in-laws die. So they married Moabite women, or no, they're not, they're her actual sons. I said that incorrectly. So she's at the mercy of her sons. And they married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. So her 2 sons married 2 Moabite women. And after they had lived for about 10 years, so 10 years after Elimelech died, Mahlon and Chilion both die. And Naomi now is left without her sons or her husband. And so she's in a foreign land with no ability to really do much. And she has no men. And so she's like, what am I going to do? I need to go back home. So Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mom's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. So she knows that for Orpah and Ruth, Orpah, I always want to pronounce Oprah, which is really difficult. I mean, it's 1 letter different. So can we call her Oprah, or is that going to be distracting? Orpah. Orpah it is. Orpah and Ruth, they're young enough to marry again. And she knows in order for a woman in this time, right, to have a life, to be provided for, to be cared for, they need to go find another husband. And she's like, look, living with me is going to be the worst case scenario for you, so you need to go back home. And she uses this word, kindness. Now, this is a Hebrew word that gets used 240-ish times in the Old Testament, and it's called chesed. And you have to say when you do it. Ready? Chesed. Can you do it? Someone just shot a loogie, but in the back. Was that you, Jordan? Right in the Mandy's hair. I saw that. Right? So we're going to talk about that word because it doesn't just mean kindness. It's something bigger, and it's what I'm going to refer to as biblical kindness as a part of that word. But it is historically an important word in the Jewish text. So what we call the Old Testament, right? The first big part of what we call the Bible, the Old Testament, is the Hebrew ancient sacred writings, okay? And Hesed is a very important word. It's used to describe God, and it's used to describe how we're to treat each other. So we're going to get into that. So, may the Lord show you Hesed as you have shown Hesed to my family, okay? So we're going to continue on. But Ruth replied. So Orpah and Ruth are told by Naomi, leave me alone. Don't urge me. She white-fanged them. Have you ever been there? Anybody who knows, knows. Okay. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. This is just a huge thing that's happening here. Where you die, I will die, and there you'll be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So I'm taking pieces of the story. There's more going on. Orpah leaves, okay? So she's like, I'm out. But Ruth is like, no. And she's become convinced that the God of Naomi is the one true God. And so she converts. She turns her life over into the hands of the one true God. And she basically makes this covenant that I will go wherever you go. And if it leads to death, so be it. I'm not going to leave you come famine or hunger or death. I'm with you. And I want you to think about this word, Hesed. All right, that means more than kindness, but it doesn't mean less than kindness. So we're like niceness in our culture, and I'm talking about biblical kindness, and biblical kindness is part of Hesed, right? And it gets interpreted kindness a whole lot in the Old Testament. So what she has shown already has been this biblical word of Hesed. And then I want you to think about this thing here. I will leave everything I've ever known, my homeland, my family, my security, any hope for the future, and money. I will leave all of that and commit myself to you out of the kindness, out of the Hesed of my heart. That is biblical kindness. It's a lot more than holding the door open for somebody. And we want to lean into that a little bit today. So, fast forward. They go back to Israel. They're living somewhere pretty poor. And they don't even have any food. And so Ruth goes and does this thing where poor people could stay around fields that were being harvested. And there's all these really cool instructions in the Old Testament. If you take the time to like read some of the rules that seem kind of boring, there's a lot of rules in there that are built in about justice and caring for the poor. And so, for instance, you weren't allowed to harvest the corners of your fields because the corners were to be left for the poor. And so they could just walk onto your field, people who didn't have enough to eat, and just harvest off of your field. That was part of how a culture was set up. And so Ruth goes, and she's doing this thing where she walks behind the harvesters, and she can pick up things that don't get picked up by the harvesters, right? So she's walking along, and she meets this guy, Boaz, who they happen to be related to. Amazing. All right, and this guy, Boaz, actually is what is called like the kinsman redeemer, okay? And basically, he's a guy in the family who can take Naomi in and take all of her like property and everything and marry, Ruth, as it turns out, to keep the line of Elimelech going. Because otherwise, Elimelech's line is going to be over, right? So he can basically redeem this story that is going to end in death, and he can bring it back to life. So we meet Boaz. And so Ruth comes and basically does this weird thing that we wouldn't understand in our culture, but she like lays at his feet while he's asleep, and then he wakes up and he sees her. And it seems a little bit seductive, which is fine. There's seductive stuff in the Bible, and she asks, cover me with your blanket. And he says, well, not right now. And so go read it. It's very interesting, but it comes down to this. Basically, she's saying, I want you to be my kinsman redeemer, and I'd like to marry you. And he's pretty psyched about that. The Lord bless you, my daughter. Not her daughter, not his daughter, just so you know. We're not condoning that. It's just a nice way to say hi. This Hesed, this kindness, same word, this Hesed is greater than that which you showed earlier. What's he referring to earlier? When she left her land and her home and her family and her future to be kind, right, to Naomi, now her offering to be with Boaz is even kinder. See, this Ruth is just exuding biblical kindness wherever she goes. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. And so the story ends with him. He's a man of character too. There's a lot of good people in this story, and he redeems their line. He gets married to Ruth, and it's really, really, really neat, okay? So this arc of this story looks like this. The tragedy of Naomi, kind of in chapter 1, right? The kindness of Ruth, and the kindness is not defined as being nice. It's this hesed. It's rooted in love. It's not just, I'm nice because that's what culture expects. It's not like manners. It's not like good manners. This is kindness that flows out of unconditional love. It's undeserved and generous, right? Like she loved Naomi. Naomi had nothing to offer, so there was nothing that Ruth was going to get in return that she knew of. Of course, God had other plans, but this was undeserved. Naomi had done nothing to deserve this. It's practical. Kindness that's hesed kindness is practical. It's actually doing something physical for someone, and it's committed. And then you see that Boaz does the same thing. He expresses the same kindness. I had enough room on this slide. I would have had all 4 points under Boaz too. Rooted in love, undeserved, okay? And then it ends in the blessing of all 3 of them, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. And the story ends with this verse, which again, you could gloss right over. It ends in a genealogy. It's kind of random because Ruth and Boaz have a kid named Oved with a B, pronounced with a V. I don't know why. Boaz, so it ends with this long lineage, and it says Boaz the father of Oved, Oved the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. Why is that significant? Those of you who have been studying your Bible for a lot of your life will know this, but if you don't know, I'm going to tell you. David's line is the line from which Jesus, the Messiah, will come to bring redemption to the world. So as Boaz was the kinsman redeemer, was the redeemer of the line of Elimelech and saved Naomi and Ruth from certain doom, Jesus will come as the kinsman redeemer of you and me and Israel and Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth for all time, and he will redeem all people who will receive his gift from certain doom. The other thing that's really cool, as if that weren't enough, I want you to read this from a commentary. It says real quick. God does nothing in these 4 chapters. This is a really weird book in the Bible. God's not one of the characters in this book of the Bible. It's just people living according to the way of God, or what we would call the way of Jesus. All right, so God's not telling them to do things, but they're living kind of mundane, normal lives, but living it by the way of Jesus. I love how this guy says this. These seemingly mundane, ordinary events in this story are woven into God's grand story of redemption for the whole world. Ruth just thought she was being nice to some old lady, right? But God was writing the story of Jesus. And so the book of Ruth invites us to consider, think about this, guys, how God might be at work in the very ordinary, mundane details of our lives as well. Who knows what time of kindness, of biblical kindness, that you might have in someone's life that could rewrite the history of their family line? Seriously, that's not asking too much for God, is it? Who knows what person that you show biblical kindness to that you could change their lives forever? See, niceness is expected, but kindness changes lives. I'm just going to sell myself out here. Preachers, we would like to say that every week. Every teaching we believe can change lives, okay? And I shy away from ever saying this because it seems empty because you're like, whatever, it's not going to change lives. But I really think this one's true, okay? Kindness isn't about just doing what's expected and being nice and being full of manners and treating people as they might treat you. No, kindness is going above and beyond. It's going the extra mile. It's laying your life down. It's doing something significant and meaningful that actually brings change. See, this word, hesed, is interpreted all these different ways in the Bible. And you can't define it with one English word. Like we have words like that in English, right? Like ball. A ball could be a thing that you bounce, or it could be a dance that you go to, right? Like go to a ball. Or you could just use it to describe, I'm having a ball, right? Like having a great time, okay? Like there's all sorts of ways. The same way with Hesed, you can't describe it with one word. It has in it this meaning of strength. There's something in Hesed that's like strong and also kind of a little bit too much, like generous, overflowing. There's something in it that's loyal. In fact, some interpreters interpret it as faithful love, loving kindness, steadfastness, loyal love, committed love, and it has always in it the word love. But it gets interpreted kindness and loving kindness a ton of times. So I want you to I'm hoping this helps to like broaden your perspective of what kindness is. That when the Bible, because the New Testament writers weren't using the word hesed because they're writing in a different language, but we have to understand that when Paul's writing the fruit of the Spirit, that he's living in a culture that would have fully understood and appreciated hesed. In fact, hesed was used to refer to God. It's how God described himself. In Exodus 34, when God comes before Moses, he says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God. He's saying this about himself. Slow to anger, abounding in, say it with me, chesed, right? Abounding in this loving kindness, faithful, strong, generous, giving, sacrificial, loyal love. Maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. This is how God describes himself, that he is utterly kind. God is abounding in it. He's overflowing in it. If you look in this biblical summary that gets quoted all the time, people love to quote this verse. What has God asked of us? He hasn't asked us to just do religious things, okay? With what shall I come to the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? That's Old Testament speak for, should I just come go through the motions? And he's like, no. He has told you what is good and what is required of you. Do justice, love. How is that normally interpreted? Those of you who know this verse. Love mercy, right? That's how you see it on t-shirts and stuff, right? Do kindness, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. That's hesed. That mercy there is another way to interpret hesed. Love kindness, like overflow with kindness. What does God want from you? He doesn't want just religious acts going through the motions. Go to church and check this box. No, do justice, live it out. Do hesed. Be a people of hesed. Be a people of overflowing, strong, generous, loyal, committed love, kindness, and walk humbly with your God. See, niceness is expected in our culture, but kindness is unexpected. Kindness is exceptional. Kindness changes lives. Kindness goes above and beyond, the extra mile, breaks through people's expectations, blows up people's expectations. Kindness makes people say, whoa, that was so kind. I would have never expected that. Yeah? All right, good. So, a couple things about biblical kindness, and then we'll close. Wow. That took me a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I have like 10 slides left. But it's all about this right here. So we'll just land right here. This is what I want to say about biblical kindness, is that it's rooted in love, it's undeserved, it's practical, and it's loyal. So if you were to take it apart, all that we've just talked about from the story of Ruth and Boaz, those four things would be the four things I would grab onto. So number one, it's rooted in God's love for people, okay? It's not just about cultural niceness, but this is about recognizing that every single person is an image bearer of God and is deserving of our love and kindness, right? The Bible tells us to be kind to one another because Christ was kind to us. Number two, biblical kindness is undeserved. It's a generous gift. It's not about this person was nice enough to me and so I'm going to be nice to them. No, it's like God's love for us, where he expected nothing in return. See, this verse tells us that God even loves, we're to love our enemies because God is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. So God not only is kind to those who deserve it, but he's kind to those who don't deserve it. So how can we do that? And God's kindness, biblical kindness, is practical. We're told over and over again in the Bible to not just love, right, with our religious speech, but to actually love with actions. And biblical kindness is loyal. It's committed. It doesn't just fade away. It's just like long obedience in the same direction, right? Eugene Peterson's famous quote, long obedience in the same direction. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to stay committed to you. This is what honestly the culture of the church is supposed to look like, right? Let us not become weary in doing good, because we're called to continually be kind to one another, especially to those. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Like, we're called to live in this kind of hesed kindness towards each other that is more than just being nice. You know, I can remember when we were in one of our lowest times in our life, this family showed up at our house, and they had cooked a month's worth of breakfasts. We had little kids at the time, so that was a big deal. And they knew that our kids loved pancakes. They made us, I don't know how many pancakes, but we filled a deep freezer. Not quite, but there was huge bags, like 10, 15 bags of pancakes and waffles frozen that they homemade and then froze, right? And we put them, and we ate those things for a month. That was hesed. It was because they loved us so deeply. It was practical. It was a gift that we didn't deserve. And it was they were with us for the long haul, right? Let me ask you a question. Could you use some of this in your life right now? Like, could you use someone doing this in your life? Could you use a friend who treated you with hesed, who treated you not just one nice thing here that you question the sincerity of, maybe they said it just because it's polite, but like really deeply means it, is rooted in their love and respect for you, that is practical and actually helps you over the long haul, that's with you? I mean, couldn't you use friends like that? This is what the body of Christ is supposed to look like. We're supposed to be producing the fruit of biblical kindness in how we treat each other first, and then how we treat the outside world. They will know we are Christians by the way we treat each other. And so, don't you think there are people, follow-up question, don't you think there are people in our world who could use that kind of hesed biblical kindness? That we could begin to treat our neighbors. Like, how would this look for you this week? Worship team, come on up. How would this begin to look for you this week to give this kind of kindness away freely? Remember, it's not deserved. It's not someone who's done you well in the past. In fact, remember, God says he's kind to the ungrateful and the evil. So how can we be kind to those who can't pay us back? How can we be practically, enduringly, loyally, generous, and kind with our coworkers this week, with our family members this week, with our friends this week? How can we be kind like that? I want to raise the stakes on kindness, because niceness is expected, right? But kindness is going to change lives. What if we ask the Lord to open a door for us this week to pour out biblical kindness into somebody's life who needs it? So we're going to close with the song like we always do. And during this time, we would love to ask for you just to pray about this. Just spend a little bit of time reflecting on it, asking the Lord how you could apply that to your life. Who is there in your life that you could pour that biblical kindness into? And what are those areas do you think, yeah, I really need to grow in that area? This is one of those fruit of the Spirit that I think we can all grow in. And how awesome would it be if people thought of City Light as just the kindest people in Newark, Elkton, and Avongrove? If we were just known for our kindness, for our practical, real life kindness.